and welcome to Bruno's Birthday Blowout. I'm your host, Angelo DeNucci, joined by the happy haberdasher, Dan the Man Sebastiano. This is Wrestling with the Future with a Twist. Tonight, we're celebrating the life, the legacy, and the memories of the champ. There's only one champ. Any other facsimile is a fake. Right, Nikki?
Amen.
Amen is right. And tonight, we give a big salute and an amen, and let's remember our boy Bruno. Joining me tonight, the man who literally wrote the book, Sal Corrente. The book is Bruno Sammartino, the autobiography of wrestling's living legend. Joining Sal Corrente is one of Bruno's very best friends from the beginning to the end, Mr. J.J. Dillon, illustrious leader of the Four Horsemen. Also joining us is a lifelong friend and a man who was called his protege. This guy, I actually watched to celebrate Bruno's birthday today by watching Larry Zbyszko get his butt handed to him. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome, brother. And, of course, my dear friend, Nikita Breznikov. Nikki, how you doing, babe?
Always happy to be here, especially on this day. With all this great lineup. Man, too much. That's beautiful. What a treat.
And last but not least, we have, you talk about a living legend. This guy, truly a living legend. The incomparable Mr. Energizer Bunny himself, the iconic, the legendary Dominic DeNucci. Dominic, how you doing, baby?
Oh, not bad, sir. No, we, this morning, actually, when I get up, I look at my book and I saw Bruno's name there, and I said, "Oh my God!" And then I cry.
Yeah, well, I remember the last time you were on the show, Dominic. We talked about Bruno a little bit, and I know you got a little emotional back then. It's a hard thing not to get emotional when you talk about Bruno, because he really was kind of the last of the good guys. Probably the last of the real guys in wrestling.
Look, we can crisscross things, but find another man like Bruno. Bruno was honest, and he was a good wrestler. He drew a lot of money for Vince McMahon and everything else.
Absolutely.
But you can't forget a man like that. Okay, so.
Absolutely. Now you're joined by a lot of our friends tonight, and we all know each other. We've all been here before. Let's bring in the guy who really kind of put this thing together, Sal Corrente. Sal, you first met Bruno when and under what circumstance?
Well, I was actually contacted by Blackjack Brown, who used to run the Wrestling Gab line. And Bruno was a part of the Gab line, and I was at the time a troubleshooting referee going to a lot of different places, from Vern Gagne and Carlos Colon and everything, and he asked me to be a part of it. So we met over the phone, and we spoke a lot every week for quite a while. And then at some point, Joel Goodhart, who used to run, I believe it was Tri-State Wrestling in Pennsylvania, wanted to put a match together. At the time, some guy named Zbyszko, I think, was the AWA World Champion, and they wanted David Sammartino to wrestle this guy, and they thought it would be interesting if David's father was in his corner. And the Zbyszko guy was going to be managed by Paul Heyman, and they couldn't get Bruno to do it, so they asked me to talk to Bruno to do it. And between me and his son pushing him so they could have a main event, that was it. And that's where we met in person for the first time. And Larry, of course, and David had a great match. And
absolutely.
The biggest thing I remember about that night, it was important to Bruno that everybody else shined except him. And this is a true story. Paul Heyman only grew up a few miles from me in Yonkers. At that time, I was still living in New York. Or going back and forth to New York a lot. I guess I was maybe gone by then. But Paul was driving me back from Philadelphia to my home in Yonkers. Literally the entire time in the car, from when we got there to when we got to Yonkers, which is at least 2 hours, he complained because Bruno refused to hit him. He wanted to come in and take a bump for Bruno so bad he couldn't stand it, but all Bruno wanted to do was make sure the young guy shined. And it's something I never forgot.
And the aforementioned Zbyszko guy happens to be with us tonight. Larry, what are your recollections, your memories of meeting Bruno? Under what circumstance did you meet the man? And did he immediately take to you, or did he think you were being a pest?
You know what? It was interesting. My mother worked at St. Sebastian's, that little church with the school, Catholic grade school. And I graduated from there at 8th grade. My mother knew I was a big Bruno fan, and she got me Bruno's address, which was a couple miles from where our house was. And when I was 16, I would drive, when I went that direction, I would take a couple of turns and drive past Bruno's house. And one summer day, through these big hedges he had around his yard, you could hardly see. But one day I caught a glimpse of him standing by his pool getting a suntan. And I went, oh my God, Bruno's right there. I mean, he was my hero. I was 16. So for some reason I stopped the car and I started crawling through these hedges because I couldn't help myself. I had to go meet him. And I wasn't afraid because he was such a good guy and beloved, but I just had to go meet him. So I walked up to him, and he's looking at this 16-year-old pimply kid who's covered now with thorns and leaves, who just crawled through his hedges. And I was very respectful, and we had a nice, not a real long talk. It's kind of hard to remember. But then I did that a couple other times, and we started talking, and Bruno was impressed with my amateur record, and he slowed down. He was getting a little older already and doing the weekend shows at the big places. So he invited me, and we started working out in his basement together, where I did the same workout he did, which is kind of why I got that same kind of big chest, big trap look.
Yeah.
And I got up here after a couple of years of working with Bruno. I was benching 465 and only weighed 240, and Bruno, who's probably already in his 40s with beat up elbows and stuff, was still benching 505. And he was, I mean, but that's how it started. I kind of walked in. When you want to hear something really, I mean, the way life means, it's meant to happen, it happens. At St. Sebastian Church that my mom worked at, when I was 13 years old and we first moved to Pittsburgh, we went to church one day, and I'm sitting in a pew in St. Sebastian's Church, and I look next to me, and I see this big broken nose, this big head, the ears. I'm going, oh my God, I'm sitting next to Bruno. I freaked out. I didn't go to communion because I didn't want to move. I wanted to stay and sit there. and after Mass, I chased him down the road with a Sunday program, and he gave me an autograph. This is before I crawled through the hedges a few years.
But my God. So your first meeting of Bruno was breaking and entering into his house, basically.
Well, that's the first time I met him and talked, but I met him at church when I was 13. But the weird thing is, that was the first time I ever met him. But when his funeral happened, it was also in St. Sebastian Church. And I was sitting in the pew. So that was the first place I saw him. And that was the exact last place that I was next to Bruno. And it really was an emotional, it was just the strangest meant-to-be thing.
You know what, Larry? That's a great segue into something that happened on this date 21 years ago. Bruno's birthday happens to be the final day that the Gorilla Monsoon was with us. Gorilla Monsoon passed away 21 years ago today.
Wow.
Talk about strange twist of irony.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. There's another guy who has an interesting story about meeting Bruno, And that man is, interestingly enough, you would never think to associate him with Bruno Sammartino because his name is J.J. Dillon, and he is associated with a motley crew of roughnecks called the Four Horsemen. And Dan, why don't we talk a little bit about J.J. Dillon? Where did you first hear the name J.J. associated with Bruno?
With Bruno?
Yeah.
The first time I ever saw those two names together, geez. Honestly, from where I was growing up, we only got the Crockett and Southern wrestling on the tapes. So the Four Horsemen and Bruno were on the cover of all the tapes I used to rent from the video store.
You were deprived as a child. J.J. Dillon, welcome back to the show, brother. Walk me through your first meeting with Bruno. How did you become a lifelong friend of this character?
Well, I was a fan since I was like 15, 16 years old. I had a fan club back then for Johnny Valentine, and I was born and raised in Trenton, New Jersey, so I went to a lot of the local events in the Northeast. And then I went to attended college. I graduated from Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania. And while I was in college, Ray Fabiani, who promoted Philadelphia, had a studio, a live studio. Well, it was actually taped, but he had a weekly 1-hour television show that aired on a Saturday, and they taped it on a Wednesday night at the NBC studio on Walnut Street in Philadelphia. And I was friends with a guy in Reading, Pennsylvania that used to go down to Philadelphia, and they had a smaller ring that where they were able to set up on the stage in the basement of the NBC studio. And I would go down to from Reading with the guy and help him set the ring up. And the ring would it was like a small theater in the basement, and the ring would just fit on the stage perfectly, and the hard camera was all the way in the back. It was like a small small theater. And I would just go on and take one of the ring jackets in the corner, wore a white T-shirt, and long story short, the referees each week for the 1-hour show were assigned by the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission. And one week I'm there, and for whatever the reason, they're ready to tape the show, and no commission referee showed up. And of course, I'd been hanging around for years, and everybody knew who I was by name, and so anyway, they're ready to do the show. They don't have a referee, and they thought, what are we going to do? We got to do the show. We got to tape it and have it. And so they thought, well, who can we get the referee? And they all started looking around, and all the eyes pointed to me, and they said, can you do it? And I just instinctively, from having been a fan all those years, knew that I could referee and knew what the referee's job was. And the only instructions they gave me was that the ring was right up at the edge of the stage, and they had a handheld camera there, but the hard camera was in the back. And they said, so when you're in the ring, you just walk 3 sides of the ring. Do not walk across the front of the ring, which would then be in the shot of the hard camera. So that wasn't too much that I had to worry about. I just would walk three sides around. So Gorilla Monsoon came over from New Jersey, and he would run the show every week. And so I got to know Bruno because I would go to all the shows that Ray Fabiani would promote, either at the Philadelphia Arena or Convention Hall. They would have a show once a month. And of course, in 1962, Bruno became champion. And that's when one week at the studio, they needed no referee showed up, and so they put me in, and I refereed the whole hour, and just instinctively knew what to do. And they all said what a great job I did, and so they managed to get me on the commission referee list. And so I started, going to the live arena shows too. And most of the referees, because it was a commission deal, most of the referees in Pennsylvania were not actually wrestling fans. It was a political thing where any time that they would referee, they'd get paid $100. So everything was fine. And so at the same thing at the live events in the arena. And so the minute that they had a situation where they had to work some kind of return match out of one of the house shows, and they had to involve a situation where there was going to be some steam on the referee, all the commission referees that were normally there picking up that $100 every time they refereed, somebody had a bad back, somebody had this, and nobody wanted to do a finish that was controversial where the fans would be upset at them. So they said, well, what are we going to do? And they looked at me and they said, well, will you referee? Absolutely. I said, I have no problem with it. Just tell me what you want me to do. And so I, as a result, really endeared myself with the wrestlers because, if it was okay just getting a win on TV, but the minute that you had to do something where, doing something controversial or something, because the fans in Philadelphia, they would really get, they would get hot. And
that's a rough
the
crowd.
referees were afraid to be involved in controversial things. And so at the arena, if there was a hot finish, nobody wanted to do it, and I would do it. And the guys always took care of me because if they were going to have something where they worked a return, where either the referee took a bump or did something where the heel used a foreign object or something and the referee didn't see it, and the fans, certain amount of the heat, is going to go on the referee for the fans always blame him for not having, eyes in the back of their head. And like in Philadelphia, if you did a controversial finish, and getting from the ring back to the dressing room could be an adventure too. And the police would come up the aisle, I remember, and the wrestlers, and of course Bruno was the main one. When I did something where a certain amount of the heat went on me because I didn't have eyes behind my back, and the fans would be mad at me. The guys would say, "Okay, the fans are upset. Wait till the cops start up the aisle from the back," and then they would tell me, when we say go, you jump down to the floor and start up the aisle towards the cops, and do not turn around. We've got your back. And so I ended up, getting involved with all the controversial finishes, and that was the foundation of a friendship with Bruno. And a couple of times, like Bruno finally had his deal was usually with whether it was Jesse Ortega or Professor Tanaka. They would have matches where there was the first match, then there would be a DQ or something. They'd bring the match back in 3 or 4 weeks, no DQ, and then finally, they would have some kind of a must be a finish thing. And when it came to Kowalski, they wanted they didn't want to have the thing end in 3 shows because it sold out and they had to turn people away.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, JJ. Along that same line, the first match I ever saw in my life, my uncle took me to see. It was at the Philadelphia Arena, or 45th and Market. It was Bruno and Killer Kowalski, as a matter of fact, and that was the first time I met Bruno, and that was the night that I met an interesting guy named Spiros Arion.
Yeah, I remember him too. I remember Spiros.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. He didn't like kids.
So anyway, I would do the hot finishes, and the wrestlers, the other referees didn't want to do it, and so in order to do something controversial to be able to bring the match back, and eventually they would bring it back, and finally they would bring in. They would do the third or fourth, and to get the fourth match after the third time, and I would be the referee the third time, and it ended up, somebody would get a chair, throw it in the ring, and then whoever it was would grab the chair, throw it to go to hit Bruno. I get hit with the chair, down I go, knocked out. I'm bleeding, and they would empty the dressing room, and here the fans are thinking this is the blow-off match where they're going to have a finish, and the dressing room emptied, and they pull Bruno and whoever his opponent was apart and take them back to the dressing room. They came and put me on a stretcher, take me back, and the fans are all looking at each other. Well, there was supposed to be had to be a finish. What happened? And then they would bring it back, and they would get a fourth sellout out of it, and then they would bring in like one of the old boxers, Tony Galento or somebody, as the troubleshooting referee.
Sure.
So it was a good deal. It was a good deal for me, but the other referees wouldn't do it. I did because I was a fan, and eventually to become a wrestler myself, which eventually happened as well. But that was the basis of the foundation of the friendship that I had with Bruno.
And that's the underlying storyline here, JJ. We all started off before we got into the business. We were fans of the business, and none bigger than my next guest, my friend, my buddy, my compadre, a guy that spends a lot of time here, Nikita Breznikov. Nikki, you and I are of the same age bracket.
Yeah.
So I know that because of our age, you couldn't have met Bruno before probably the age of 16 or 17. I'm just, of course, guessing. But when did you meet him, and how far into your career or his did you finally meet the guy?
Well, let me back up 1 second. What JJ was talking about. We all remember Dick Worley, the Philadelphia referee.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
TV. Dick told me he used to carry a gun for that same reason. He's like, I took the
John
heat.
Stanley was another referee from New Jersey that was very well known.
Yes, because Dick said, when I got to get to that car, I'm on my own, and they're blaming me for the title change or whatever happened. So he's like, I was afraid for my life. So yeah, it definitely, the heat was on the refs. But
by the way, Nikki, his license plate read TV ref.
TV ref. Oh yeah, Dick was. He was a fan, just like you're saying. Everybody started as a fan. For me,
but this is JJ, and the show tonight is about Bruno. So I have a Bruno, a couple of Bruno stories, but one in particular where back in those days, because the referees were still assigned by the athletic commission. And you would referee, and at the end of the night, you would get handed $100 cash, which that was a lot of money in those days. And I was a kid in college, so that $100 was, and you're talking about 1962. So
wow,
you look at what the $100 was back then would be like it's $500, $800, or maybe $1,000 now.
Yep.
In terms of the value of that $100, and
wow.
But anyway, I would do the controversial finishes, and I remember with Bruno, I would do something, and then I saw him later in the week. I think I went to Reading, Pennsylvania. They had an outdoor show, and I didn't get assigned as a referee, but I went to the show because I was a fan, and I would go watch anyway. And so Bruno was there. And he pulled me off, and he thanked me for what I did in Philly to get the fourth match out of it. And he said to me, well, I hope they took good care of you. And I said, well, I normally get $100, which is to me is still a lot of money. And they hit me with a chair, and I bled, and they carried me from the ring on a stretcher. And I said they still paid me $100, and I said, I never said anything. I thought, well, this is really kind of something special, I thought, but they gave me the $100 and didn't say anything more. And so Bruno told me, he said, I'm glad you didn't say anything. And he said, do not say anything. Leave it up to me. And what happened then was that Bruno went to Vince McMahon, because they would go every Thursday down to Washington, D.C., to Vince's office, and that's where the guys would get the balance of their money for the rest of the weeks, and that's where they would tape a show from the arena for TV. And so anyway, Bruno goes to Vince McMahon and says, that I had done this great job, and that the referees, the commission got $100, and that I got carried out of the ring on a stretcher, was bleeding, and that they gave me that same $100, and nothing more was said. And Bruno told me to make sure you don't say something, and Bruno then says to Vince, he said, I'm sure that you're going to see that this was taken care of and made right. To which Vince said to Bruno, well, of course, I just wasn't aware of it, and let me look into it. So the next show was, I think, in Reading, Pennsylvania, and I wasn't assigned that night, but I went down to the matches, and I remember Phil Zacco was there, and he saw me, and his eyes, he said, hey, come here, kid. He takes me around the corner, goes in his wallet, into his pocket, picked out a roll of cash, and counted out $250 in cash, and handed it to me, and said, Vince appreciates what you did and wants you to have this. And to me, that was like a small fortune. And and again, it was because Bruno Sammartino said, let me take care of this. I'm glad you didn't say anything. He went to Vince, and that's how I got taken care of. And I, not that it was a matter of strictly monetary, Bruno just always treated not just me, but he treated everybody that way. He was.
And you know what, JJ? I have a feeling.
Didn't have an ego. He was respectful to everybody.
Yeah, I was just going to say I have a feeling also, JJ, that that was probably the last you heard of it. I can't imagine Bruno using that to like rub it in your face or say, "Here's why I did this for you, and now you're going to do something for me." I can't see that happening.
No, the only thing was that Zacco saw me and gave me the extra. I got the 100 at the show, and he gave me another 250 at the Reading show, which I just was there. Bruno was not on the card that night. The next time I saw Bruno saw me, and he said, has anybody talked to you? And I said, yeah. I said, at the Reading show, Phil Zacco called me over, and I said, and I was given another $250, and I said, that's a lot of money. And he said, were you happy? Were you satisfied with that? I said, satisfied. I said, I can't thank. I said, I know the only reason that happened was because you spoke up, and I heard after that Bruno a lot of times, and this is, I'm hearing it secondhand, but that they would say to Bruno, like Vince McMahon and what, say, well, why did you speak up? He said, you're the champion. We pay you extremely well. And he said, how come you're going to bat for these other guys and speaking up for them? And Bruno, made it like it was no big deal and said because it was the right thing to do. And that tells you everything you need to know about Bruno.
Nikita, my friend Nikita Breznikov.
Yes, sir.
Talk to me, brother.
Well, the first time I met Bruno, it was for a Dino Sana show. I think Larry will remember that name. And
sounds familiar, yeah.
Dino used to run a lot around Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, that area. So
I know Dino Sana very well.
Do the show in Pittsburgh. So I'm with Nikolai. I'm going to manage him. We go up there. And Nikolai loved Bruno. Nikolai, that was Bruno's idol. And I'm going to say it now. I've said it before, maybe to a few people, but I really believe when Bruno died, that's what led, because then a couple of months later, we lose Nikolai. I think that took a piece of him with him. And that night we meet Bruno, and Bruno's doing the TV commentary with one of Dino Sana's kids. And I said, oh, Bruno, I love you put me over a little bit. He said, don't worry, he did like $1 million. But the other thing I remember the most, before the show started, I could I hear that voice coming down the hall, and it's like, oh man, that's Bruno. I know that voice. Man, you can't forget it. But he went to every new person that was there, every kid, every veteran, shook hands.
Yeah.
Hi, Bruno Sammartino. He did that with everybody, and it's like that's class right there, man.
What were your impressions of this guy? Now here's and Bruno has been described by a lot of people, Nikki, as larger than life.
Yes.
Now, you know, in fullness, he was like 5'10", maybe 5'11", but you know, a very wide, imposing guy. You know, certainly nobody's pushover. Were you intimidated the first time you met him? Are you respectful? What was
All of the
give
above.
me
All of
open
the
up the
above.
mindset of a young Nikita Breznikov back in the day.
I felt like the luckiest son of a bitch on the face of the earth. I'll tell you, it was like I don't believe this. It's if you say dreams don't come true, I'm proving it wrong. They do. Here I am looking into the eyes of this guy, an idol that you watch. I watch so many times. But I tell you what, I used to hear from Johnny Valiant, Nick, the strength of Bruno, because Johnny used to say he's like a gorilla. We had a match, and Sal remembers this. It was a stadium in New Jersey. It was Nikolai against Dominic. Bruno was the ref. I'm there managing Nikolai. I got hit by Bruno at the end. He tried to be nice and easy, and he was. But I can only imagine this man in his prime, he could kill you. I'm sure he could kill you with no problem whatsoever. He was a gorilla for sure, man.
Ask Buddy Rogers.
Yeah.
The man.
Yes, sir.
Take it away, brother.
You know, Mr. Zbyszko, before we started recording, you were telling a story about a warning you gave to some of the current wrestlers with their style and everything. I was curious. Yeah, I'm curious. You know, I'm only 37, so most of my experience with Bruno comes from old tapes and everything. But there's a lot of wrestling fans today under the age of 30, teenagers in their 20s that are still huge fans of Bruno, even though his style is absolutely nothing like what's popular today. I'm curious, since you were, you know, talking about the comparisons, what is it about Bruno's style, his presence, whatever it is in the ring that still resonates with fans today, even though it's nothing like anybody that's popular in the current market?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting because I'm surprised how many young people know who I am from that generation. But the thing about Bruno was when you watched him on TV, he was really a real guy. He was being himself. And the only reason he was such a big star was because, and people have a hard time realizing this today because of the business in the world, people don't realize how truly loved he was. The fans, I mean, really loved Bruno. When Bruno fell down with blood, people in the arena got heart attacks and died. I mean, he was probably the most truly beloved wrestler ever.
Well, I'll tell you what, Larry, when you hit him with the chair, I tried to find out where you lived.
Oh, people tried to kill me. I mean, I didn't realize, the amount of hate that would come upon me. I mean, wow.
That tells me one thing. Let me talk to you about that. The fact that you got so much hate talks about how much he was loved. It had to come from somewhere.
It did. People truly loved him. Today on TV, I mean, you say, oh, this guy flies around, this guy, but they don't love the wrestlers today. Like, they don't even say wrestlers, they say performers. But people truly loved Bruno. I mean, it didn't matter if you were an Italian or a, Polak or a black guy, white guy, brown guy, yellow guy, red guy, whatever the hell, he was truly loved. He was truly loved.
But Larry, the thing that made that so special was the fact that we watched since 1974, you at his side, and we was like, because I was a kid back then, I'm watching it, I'm enjoying it, and it's like, here's Larry with Bruno, that's great. Then when you turn on him, it's like, man, that son of a bitch, we couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And that's what made it 10 times the heat. Hey, Larry, and real quick, the first match you had at the Spectrum, it was March 1st, 1980. What did they estimate? 10,000 were turned away? 10,000 turned away.
Oh yeah, I mean it was amazing. I mean for those days, records were set. I mean they raised the prices of the tickets. Thousands were turned away from Shea Stadium. I mean it was unheard of for the time. And it was, again, how loved Bruno was because he was retired. He was doing the broadcasting. And I knew in my heart, if anybody could get Bruno back in the ring for something, they would be a big star. I mean, and so I took the shot because I was kind of labeled, hey, Bruno's protege, what's his name? And then, it took some time to talk him, but it kind of backfired a little bit because I didn't realize how hated I would be. I mean, but that was what gave me the big break. Otherwise, who knows?
Larry, I heard a story about you and Bruno conspiring together to put the screws to old man McMahon. Some piece of business that Junior wanted you and Bruno to do, and this was that the old man was still around at the time. Bruno said he wasn't going to do this, and somebody wanted you to do something, and what I heard was, oh really? This is what he wants. Well, we'll see, and we'll change the script up on him. Do you know anything about that? What was said? Who was supposed to do what?
No, not really. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, the weird part for me was, Bruno was Bruno. He was a big star, retired. And I was still kind of a young kid. I was 26, 27, with that. And the only thing with Vince McMahon Sr. was, in those days, it was a stereotypical, bad guy, Professor Tanaka or Killer Kowalski or, George Steele. It was a 300-pound, big, scary brute kind of guy. And when I first approached Vince Sr. to, with this idea, Vince was, he didn't see it really happening with me because I wasn't that stereotypical, big, ugly, threat kind of guy. And I couldn't blame Vince at the time because, for some kid to have an idea is one thing, but Vince Sr. was the guy that had to pull out his wallet and his checkbook and rent Shea Stadium and the Garden and all, but so it was a little bit of a headbutting session to get him to go for it because he was taking a chance of, if it didn't work, he'd lose his ass. But
Dominic, you still with me?
Once you saw how hot it was,
Yes.
it was great.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, sir. Dominic, so you and Bruno both came over from the old country, Italy. Who came first? Were you here before Bruno, or did he come?
No. Bruno came in. Bruno was young. He was only 6 or 7 years old because he go to school. Because his father came in, he was working somewhere in the mine. And but I came in, I was 18 and a half after the war finished. And
right.
In the 40s, 43, 44, 43, we got the soldier, the American soldier, for 9 days in that house because we live in the country, in a farm,
right.
And that's when every time the soldier was coming, first to the German and then the American, and as one man speak the language. And then when the American was there, they was playing baseball and not too far away from the house, and they say to me, "Hey, come on, Dominic, go pick up a bottle of wine." And I go around and pick up the wine, and I was talking to him, and I said to him one time, I said, I want to go to America. And he said, well, he said to me, good luck, man, you're too young. I said, well, in a couple of years, I want to do it. And he gave me the number and address and I still got them now here. And about 3 months later, I started to do the paper. I want to come over. And when I come in, and I started to wrestle, amateur, not the professional, amateur, and in Montreal, and then from Montreal they ship them in Detroit and etc. Then Calgary, and then Calgary opened the door for me because from Calgary I go to San Francisco.
Right.
And I stay 1 year there, and after that, another place because they told me to go to Australia.
Right. Oh,
and
yeah.
Australia with Jim Barnett.
Sure.
And I stay 1 year, and then me and Kowalski will have to leave because of the ticket. And I go back in San Francisco. My car was in San Francisco for 1 year, so I go back. When I go back to Australia, another year.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and the second time, I go back to San Francisco, and the Roy Shire said to me, Dominic, I want to see you. We were doing the television in Sacramento, and he said, I want to talk to you. And I said, private. I said, well, I didn't say anything because I'm going on the television. So he said, Jim Barnett called. But I can't say what he said.
Oh, yes, you can.
No.
Oh, you said, Dominic,
No,
you said from the first show. I want you to say it now.
No, I can't say what you said.
Oh,
but anyway, so I said to him, I said, what's the matter? And he said, Jim Barnett called me this morning at 2 o'clock, but he used other words.
Yeah.
And
oh, yeah.
and he said,
Other words.
I want Dominic back. So when he told me, I said, well, I just came in. I want to stay here at least a couple of months, 3 months in San Francisco. And he said, do you, the promoter said, do you understand? He wants you to go back this week. And I said, but why? I said, I just left. The other guy that came in there, and he turned red a little bit. He said, damn it. He said, because you know, draw the people, you have to go back. So
yeah,
said,
I'll tell you what, that we talked about it. By the way, Dominic was on the show a couple of weeks ago. He gave us the R-rated version of that story the first time. So we got the PG version this time. But if you want to hear the R-rated version, check out our YouTube channel. Just watch the Dominic DeNucci episode. Nikita and Dan, they popped huge for that one. I'll just say that. Now, Dominic, you went to Australia. Did Bruno follow you over, or did you follow him over?
No, Bruno followed me, but he only came in for 20 days.
Oh, okay, I got you.
You know, and when he came in, I mean, we got a good time. I can't tell you what we did, but anyway, Jim Barnett, I go pick him up. I go pick him up at the airport with the taxi, and we go see Jim Barnett.
Sure.
And Jim Barnett, but he was a good man. Not to say talk about him because he's gone.
Yeah.
And Jim Barnett came in and said, "Oh, my boy," is that Bruno?
Yeah. We've heard stories about Jim Barnett. He sounds like one of the classic characters that are missing from wrestling today.
Yeah.
So Dominic,
hey Angelo.
Yeah.
Before we get off of the gym, Bruno told me a story 2 or 3 times about Jim Barnett and Dominic and him in Australia. So I think I wouldn't mind telling it. So
Go ahead.
Bruno's over there working with Barnett, and Bruno and Barnett had some history, and it wasn't the greatest in the world, but he agreed to go over there. Yeah. And he said they were out, and of course, Bruno and the guys over there, they were doing, the business was great and everything was good. So, do you remember Rosemarie from the Dick Van Dyke Show?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rosemarie was over there in a restaurant, and the way Bruno told me the story, they were all sitting there, and as they, getting ready to leave, they walk up to the table, and Jim Barnett says, "Rosemarie, I'd like you to meet my boys, Bruno and Dominic."
Well, how the hell am I going to forget that?
Bruno said, "Sal, what in the world did she think of us?"
Yeah, when we walk out, the Bruno said to me, "Dominic, just outside the door, like 15 feet outside," and I started what he said. Boy, I think probably they want to think that we like Jim Barnett. We are queer too.
Rosemarie did our autograph events in LA many times, so I could only imagine because she had no filter either.
Yeah, I had many years ago. I actually had an experience with her at an autograph convention in Atlantic City. She was I will say this, she was a hoot. She was a real old Hollywood character, and we need a lot more people like Rosemarie. No filter, absolutely unfiltered.
I always thought that was a good story. It just seemed like the right time to tell it.
Yeah.
This is JJ Dillon. I've been enjoying all the conversation, and before I jump off, I'd like to make one more comment that I've been around the business. I've been around the business for over half a century, and it's a wonderful business that is basically everything that I have in the way of material things I owe to the wrestling business of giving me the opportunity to earn a living and to go places in the world like Australia and Japan that I wouldn't have otherwise, in Europe. And one thing that I can say about Bruno Sammartino that I don't know if there's anybody else, because it's a tough business and it's hard to go through a lengthy career. And my career lasted over half a century, and it's hard to have been in the business for that length of time and not have somebody who, whether rightfully so or not, doesn't have something nice to say about you. But I can say with all honesty, in my whole time in and around the business, Bruno Sammartino is the one person that, being around him for over half a century, I never ever heard one ever say anything negative about Bruno Sammartino. That's how highly respected he was by anyone and everyone that ever knew him and worked for him.
Yes, you're right. On that thing, you're right. Completely, I follow you, because Bruno was a man. You don't find him anywhere.
No, he was.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he and I remember, back, people in the office, and I'm not, talking negative about Vince McMahon, but I'm told there was a conversation with Vince and Bruno where Vince said to Bruno, "We pay you so well because you're the champion and you've drawn so much money and you deserve everything you get." But you then turn around and come in and go to bat for these guys underneath of you, and kind of questioning why Bruno did that. In other words, here's the biggest, greatest champion we ever had that probably made more money than anybody else, but he cared enough about other people and the guys that were in the dressing room with him that he would go to bat for them. And it got back to him that, that they had a good house and the guys underneath didn't get what Bruno considered to be a fair payday. He would go to the office and he would stick up for them, and a lot of times the guys would get another check for a show that they never would have seen that money had Bruno Sammartino not spoken up.
Yeah. Yes. Yes,
well,
you're
JJ,
right on
thank
this.
you
Yes.
so much. I really appreciate you the time you've given us. JJ, and I've said it before, you've been on the show your third time now. You have an open invite here anytime you wish, for whatever platform you wish. I think you know that we respect old school. We are a caretaker of the history of old school wrestling, and you, my friend, are a welcome guest anytime you want to be here.
You mean
I
JJ's
appreciate
over
that, and
there?
I've enjoyed it.
Sir, JJ's
Yes,
over
sir.
there?
Yes.
JJ's
You
at home.
there?
JJ's at home, Dominic. He's not in the studio. He's at home.
I'm at home. I'm at home in
Oh,
Delaware.
he's home. Oh, okay. I thought he was there.
No.
But anyway.
But
Well,
I'm glad you did this program, and there's nobody in all the history of the business that deserves all the great things that were said about Bruno Sammartino. As I heard tonight, he's the one person, like I said, that in over half the country around the business, I never heard anyone ever say anything negative about Bruno Sammartino. He was a great champion, and he was my friend.
Amen,
And he was
brother.
a good man. He was a very, very good man. And I knew him. I met him in Canada, south of Toronto, at 50 Mile. And he said to me, where you come from? And I told him. And I said, how about you? Now, where he lived and where we live, it was roughly about 75 miles. And he said to me, how'd you get over here? I said, what do you mean? On a boat. I came in on a boat.
That's
oh, my
hilarious.
God. But Bruno,
Well,
every morning.
JJ, do you have to go, JJ, or can you hang out with us?
No, I'm going to jump off, but I want to thank everybody for allowing me to be part of this. And we could talk for hours and hours about Bruno
Oh my God, brother,
Sammartino.
you are welcome here anytime.
He was a great champion, but he was
Yes.
even a greater human being, and he was my friend.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do too, brother. I do too.
JJ,
JJ,
how you
thank you
feel?
for joining us. I appreciate it. We'll say good night to JJ. Thanks so much, JJ. Take
Good
care.
night, good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Legend.
All right. That was I'll tell you what. I love having JJ. He brings a historical perspective you don't get much these days. Larry, you still with me?
Oh, yeah, I've been listening. And, you know, Bruno taught me one thing, too, that JJ was kind of touching on. But Bruno felt that it was the top guy, you know, the big star's responsibility to make sure all the underneath guys made money. Because in those days, there was no contracts. If we didn't sell tickets, we didn't eat. And Bruno, I remember times when I think me and Dominic one time for sure, we had to carry Bruno out of the back seat of a car into the arena so he could get massaged for a couple hours because he was so hurt that he shouldn't have worked. But he would work to make sure no one would want refunds. The people would get paid. I mean, Bruno did things when he was hurt to make sure that everybody else on the card would still make money.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was the greatest.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you, listen, I'm going to tell you one about Bruno. We left together, Pittsburgh, and we stayed in Hawaii for one night, and we were going to Japan. Now, from the hotel, that's true. And sometime I was telling my wife before she passed away, she was laughing. And Bruno said, okay, I'm going to swim. And it was a wall. He said, on the other side of the wall is nice, and I'm going to go over there. And I said, okay. And I stay on this side. It was about 4 feet high, the water. That's good for me. So anyway, he said that then when I come back, then I'm going to swim a little bit, and then we go have something to eat in the morning. And so I said, okay, now it's a two-way, left and the right. On the way you go up is 7 step, on the way down the 7 step. Now when you come back, you was wet, and you fall down. He fall on his ass all the way down.
Oh God!
He got pissed off. He said to me, he said, if I was by myself today, I will turn around and go back home in Pittsburgh. And I said, wait a minute. I said, what are you going to say? What are you going to say to the guy over there? You have to call him. What are you going to say? I fall down in the water and I hurt myself? I said, you can't do that. I said, you're stronger than that. But he was bleeding too a little bit. I said,
oh,
no.
my God.
I said, no, we're going to go.
Yes, sir.
And by
You wrote the definitive book on Bruno. But my friend Nikita Breznikov and I have a little bone to pick with you.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. And Nikki and I talked about this on a show we did about wrestling authors. And the guys telling stories in kayfabe and writing books in kayfabe. Why didn't Bruno's story go beyond what was already known? Because I felt like when I read the book, I had heard it all before. Remember, Nikki, when we were talking about that?
Yes.
Well, I mean, this is what I can tell you about the history of the books. Of course, the first book, there were a lot of issues with that. First of all, it was very poorly presented, quite honestly. But beyond that, it was told the way Bruno wanted it told. The only reason we even put another book out about 9-10 years ago was because in personal appearances, fans, because the book was completely out of print, fans used to have to pay $75, $80, $90, $100 to get a copy of the book for Bruno to sign in personal appearances.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, quite honestly, I mean, I had to hear about this all the time, and I just got tired of hearing about it. So I said, Bruno, why don't I see if I can do something about this? So I was able to do something about it, purchased a few of the books at the $100 price, whatever it was, and got some people to scan it into a computer, added a few pages, added a few pictures, and just put the book out just to stop all that price gouging on the book. And Bruno was satisfied. One day I heard Bruno do an interview, and I said, Bruno, you were kind of speaking very openly on this interview. And he said, well, Sal, what do you expect me to do? Everybody else is out there talking and this, that, and the other. He said, I'm not going to look like a jerk. I said, well, then why don't you let me update the book? So, I mean, I don't know what you're comparing it to, but, I mean, quite honestly, I pulled out everything out of the book that treated wrestling like a real competition and replaced it with the stories the way Bruno told them to me.
And I absolutely respect that. I'll tell you, as far as interviews are concerned, and I think you might know the interview I'm referring to. Bruno sat down and did about a 3.5-hour interview with Sean Oliver from Kayfabe Commentaries. Probably the most open and honest interview. Still, by the way, mostly in kayfabe, but he told it in a way that seemed more realistic, if that makes any sense to you. One of the things that has been alluded to, everybody say he's such a nice guy, and he really was. That's not fake. That's real. He was a really down-to-earth, nice guy. And I understand the need for him to tell his story without trashing anybody, because, it is his story. But there seemed to be like a concerted effort And that's the only. Nikki, you know where we're going with this when you and I talked about this.
Yeah. Now, in fairness to Sal, it was more about the first book because that was
true.
Like, come on, it's like Bruno. We know
the first book was. I mean, there's nothing. And I told Bruno this. I mean, I'm going to be very honest. I said, Bruno, the first book, not necessarily. Because keep in mind, guys, 1990 things were different. Right?
Yeah,
it really wasn't what it is. And of course, the book probably got started 88, 89. But I told him, I said, it's not a good representation of you in any way. I let him know that point blank. But no matter what we think of the book, and there were people who had a negative opinion of it, many had a positive opinion, but there were people who had a negative one. But the most we heard, the complaints about the book were nothing compared to the complaints about the price of getting a book and having, nobody want to pay $100 for a book or $75 for a book with a $25 price to have to come to an event and pay another $20, $30 to get an autograph.
Sure.
And just people, wrestling fans especially complain. I did anything that I did a direction. There was the rewrite of the book that I did not want pulled out, and quite honestly, I'm not sure it needed to be pulled out. Bruno asked me to respect his wishes. I did that. Now,
absolutely.
I can tell you this. If I had been given free reign to do what I want, there would have been some different stories in the book, etc. Everything in there is accurate.
Oh yeah, and I'm not.
But there are things that I would put in there otherwise if I didn't want to respect Bruno's wishes, which would never happen.
Well, and Sal, I thank you for saying that, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form putting doubt on the veracity or authenticity of the stories or the truthfulness. I know factually, everything in the book is based in fact. That I know, and largely because you were at the helm. But what I was referring to is Bruno was always, and I think Larry will chime in on this too. Larry, I would love you to chime in on this. Bruno was always very much aware of who he was. And he was always aware of the stories he told. And he always protected not only his brand and his stories, but he also protected his business. Am I being accurate, Larry?
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I mean, he believed in protecting the business because that's, how everybody made a living, was protecting the business.
Angelo, this is not the first time you can go down this road. Bruno used to wear suits all the time. There was an entirely different process. Eventually, Bruno got tired of seeing everybody else coming out dressed any way they wanted to, and he said, "So I'm not dressing in suits anymore. This is crazy." He said, "What am I doing? Everybody else is out there in blue jeans, shirts." He said, "What do I?" He said, "I'm going to look presentable, but I'm not getting in suits anymore." And which is an interesting story about that. When Bruno was the world champion, he carried himself like a world champion around the country. I'm sure Larry would agree with that. And one day Vince McMahon said, "Hey, it's great the way you dress in a three-piece suit, especially you're talking in the '60s and everything." He said, "You look like a champion." He said, "Hey Vince, let me ask you a question. Do I look like a world champion sitting in the tourist section of the plane?" And he said that was the very last time that he was ever in the tourist section. From then on, he flew first class all the time.
Well, Sal, even
to
to the
your mouth
point
shut.
when I heard, I don't know if it was you that I heard tell the story, Sal, or whether it was someone else, but just to validate what you're saying, my understanding, I'm trying to remember who the hell told it. It might have been you, or for all I know, it might have been Bruno himself that said it. But he actually went out, and if you know the story, he actually went out and bought a Rolls Royce.
That's a true story.
Do you know the? Okay, can you tell the story, please?
Well, I don't know the details, but he's definitely discussed with me about about buying the Rolls Royce, and he felt that it really did a great job representing, that wrestling was a great occupation. And, look, in those days, athletes didn't make a ton of money. Bruno told me that him and Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle in the '60s were the three highest paid athletes in the world.
Okay, yes, and I remember you saying that.
And
Nikki,
that's
do you
reasonable to
remember-
believe, right?
Yeah, no, I remember you telling that story before. You're absolutely right. Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, and Bruno were the 3 highest paid athletes in the country.
In those days, football players were making what, $10,000 a year for whatever it was little bits of money.
Yeah,
They had jobs in the off season. Yes.
Yep.
but I saw a photo today of that Rolls Royce, Bruno wearing a suit, signing autographs for people surrounding his car. Larry, did you ever get to ride in that car?
Yeah, I rode in the Rolls, and I'll tell you a funny story. Because the Rolls had a cassette player, you know, those old cassettes,
Oh, yeah.
the 8-tracks, the old 8-track players.
Oh, my God.
And Bruno he only had one 8-track, and it was the Italian opera guy, Pavarotti, or whoever the big Italian opera guy was.
Yeah.
And everywhere we went, Bruno would play that same, 8-track. So I snuck in his garage one day, and I pulled it out because I had an 8-track that looked the same, and it was Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Oh, my God.
So we get in the car when we take off, and Bruno puts on the radio, and instead of some operas going, taking care of business, and Bruno's going, what the hell's wrong with this thing? And he doesn't know how to work it. He's pushing buttons and turning stuff. Pretty soon I'm laughing my ass off, and he goes, what the hell? He finally pulls it out and looks at it. He goes, oh, you asshole, and he throws it out the window. And I gave him back. I gave him back his opera tape.
That is hilarious. Oh, my God. Nikita, you wrote the book When It Was Real.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about when it was real, my friend. Let's talk about when it was real. Let's talk about the reality of Bruno getting cracked over the head with a chair by our friend Mr. Zbyszko and what that did to a young Nikita Breznikov.
Before we get to that part, and why we're all here tonight, it was the legitimacy of Bruno that made us believe. Even though, people would talk shit about what wrestling was, everybody had their own friggin' opinion. We believed because of sincerity. You can't make anybody love. You can't make fans love somebody, whether it's a singer, an athlete, an actor. You either do or you don't. And when you look at Bruno, that's why I think Pedro had so much problem. How the hell are you going to follow that? Yeah, Pedro was good with the Hispanics. That was wonderful. But when you took him out of New York and maybe a little bit of Philadelphia, he wasn't going to do anything in Boston. Baltimore was more of a Bobo town. And,
was Pedro overshadowed by Bruno? Was it too much too soon?
It was too much. Yeah, it is. How are you going to follow that? Billy Graham was great because it was giving like Larry and Tony Garea and Chief title matches. And I think you could probably say that Bruno wrestled Graham, especially at the Spectrum. They, again, turn away crowds because people wanted to see that bastard, Superstar Graham, who stole that belt, get beat. And
That was
look, Andy, it boils down to this for me, and I'm just going to speak very, very bluntly. Bruno is the only guy that I'm aware of in this industry to not only give up the title, but threaten to walk out the door if they didn't take it away from him. As Larry indicated, he was very beat up and very hurt. The first run around, and these rings of today are much different. They were working in boxing rings his first loop around. When he came back out of retirement at some point, felt like the rings were trampolines, and he basically told the guys in the back, if I had rings like this, he said, I would have been champion for 20 years. And they had him working in all the B clubs and so forth. So he gives up the title twice, and facts are facts. It's just plain and simple. When all these other guys were champions, you would find Bruno many times, not only Bruno, but many times you would find Bruno added to the card as a special bonus attraction. When Bruno was a champion, you didn't see special bonus attractions. And when the old man and the kid got on the plane and flew to Pittsburgh to ask Bruno to come back, it wasn't because they were turning people away at the gate. it was because they felt they had a problem. I mean, I don't care what anybody tells me.
Yeah.
The McMahons are not going to get on a plane and fly to Pittsburgh and ask a guy to come out of retirement who is not asking to come back. He's busy all around the world working his own schedule. And Larry, I don't know what you think about what I just said, but that's my take on it. And the numbers and the wrestling cards and everything else, I think, support everything that I'm saying. I don't care who thought it was popular. When it's all said and done, those are the facts.
Yeah, Bruno is so loved and so believable that nobody wanted to see him retire when he did, and there was no one that could follow him. And the McMahons, plus their partners, Phil and them, I mean, without Bruno selling out all the big clubs, they weren't making any money. So they were kind of in a panic. You know, can you see Bob Backlund following Bruno?
Well, I want to explore too, Larry. I want to explore that a little bit. Let's try, before I do though, I want to just, and maybe Sal, you might have the answer. I know Nikki may have the answer. I've got 2 dates over here for Bruno's last match. One of them, provided to me by Nikita Breznikov, is part of my artwork tonight behind me. The Meadowlands in New Jersey. Nikki, would tell me the date on that and what the circumstances of that.
October the 4th, 1981, against George Steele. That was when Bruno really retired. And then, everything else came about years later. He's trying to help the son and all that other stuff. So that it was kind of like, Sal will tell better than anybody. I don't think Bruno's heart was really 100% in it, but he did it.
Yeah.
But his real retirement was then, 1981. It's like, boom. Hey, without
and Sal, I'm hearing that there was another date that's being touted about as Bruno's final, and that is a match with of all people, Hulk Hogan, if you can believe that.
In Baltimore.
Yeah.
Oh, did that happen?
Well, it was a tag match, Bruno and Hulk Hogan, and I think against the One Man Gang, maybe and John Studd. I'm not positive right off the top of my head. I do think the One Man Gang was a part of it. What happened? Well, first of all, in the Meadowlands, Bruno had promised that he would help to open the Meadowlands, and the bottom line, like all construction, it was delayed pretty significantly. But Bruno gave his word, so he hung around, and then when he left there, he got on a plane. Went to Japan for 10 days. When he got there, he found out instead of wrestling Baba, he was going to tag with Baba. As far as this other thing, this is the way it goes. I believe they were in Houston the night before. And Bruno, they were supposedly going to Baltimore to film something. Well, what happened is they never told Bruno he was booked. So when
I
they
heard
landed,
that story, yeah.
Yeah, when they landed, Gino told them what was going on. And because they figured, Bruno and Gino were pretty close. And so they figured he would be the one to break the news. And he told them, he said, look, Gino, I'm going to do this thing. He said, but I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what it is. Do not book me. I will not be there. This is it. Tonight's the night.
Yeah.
And that was it. He didn't ever want to miss bookings, but he told him point blank, whether you advertise me or not, I won't be there.
Yeah, I know that to be true. Based on several sources. One was very personal. So, Nikki.
Yes.
You've got. By the way, before we get to you, Nikki, Dan the Man, you've been very quiet. I want to turn it over to you for a little bit.
Hey, like I said, the youngest guy on a panel of you guys reminiscing about a friend, so I didn't expect to say much.
Well, you just got smartened up.
Well, no, it's stuff like this. I mean, I've been a fan of wrestling my whole life, and hearing all the the real stories, you don't get that anywhere else, but from experience and people who were there. And I guess my question goes, you guys were talking about the evolution, and you mentioned like the sales and all that. You talked about Bruno knowing he was. Angelo, you can vouch for this. We've had this question before when we were talking to like Karen McDaniel and some of those types, where a lot of people that are famous they can't wrap their head around exactly how big they are. I mean, based on ticket sales,
you know what, Dan? That's
numbers,
a really good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah,
because we've got a guy here who might know this. Larry, Did Bruno understand how famous he was?
You know what? As well as I knew him, and he was almost like a dad, big brother, I don't think he ever thought about that. I mean, he never thought he was above anybody or he was a big star. I mean, he knew the value of him drawing money, but he never thought of himself. In fact, that whole thing, you know, at the end of his career, someone wrote an article calling him the living legend. And Bruno didn't like that. He didn't like being called the living legend at the end of his career because he felt that was like being braggadocious. Like, you know, he was a very humble guy.
You are the only
it,
person I've ever heard tell that story.
Well, he told me, I mean, he didn't like that because he didn't think of himself as above everybody else. And
yeah,
that's what people loved about him.
Larry,
He was one of them.
Story.
You know, Bruno was definitely humble.
But you're the first wrestler I ever heard it from.
Well, when we traveled around, Bruno never thought that people of a certain age especially would recognize him. I had him in a hotel, I don't know, maybe 2014 or whatever. Some 19-year-old kid came walking up to him, said, "Aren't you Bruno Sammartino?" And I'd say, "Yeah, Bruno, it's tough when you're off TV 20 years. I mean, you know, because he would say this kind of thing all the time. He really was humble, as Larry said. It was very interesting. Anywhere we went, he was recognized. It's amazing that you could be cheered and screamed for the way he was and it not really go to your head or anything like that. You know, let me tell you, when I was in high school, the people did not believe in wrestling. Most of the people there didn't believe in wrestling, and I wanted to believe in wrestling. And what in the world is that?
What? I have no idea. It's music.
And I wanted to believe in wrestling, but the guys all made fun of me. And after Zbyszko hit Bruno with the chair, when I got to school Monday morning, as soon as I arrived, people said, "We know, we get it. It was real. We agree." And, you know, these guys did that so well. And then, of course, and I don't know whether Larry remembers this or not, Larry's actually, I think, the first wrestler that I really met. Square Garden through the back door. And who would know all these years later, he'd work with me, how many times I'd referee matches with him, and how much time we'd spent together. I mean, probably 40 years later. It's amazing how it comes full circle. But then we went to, once they were done in Shea, then they did the B clubs. And we were in the Westchester County Center, which I'm sure Larry recollects. And the mob of people, I mean, I was still young. I was in like the 11th. The mob of people, how Larry got to the ring, I still really don't know. But I looked around and I said, if anything breaks out in this place, we have no chance here. We're dead. We are absolutely dead. There is no way out of this building with all of these people if anything goes wrong. And I've never forgotten it. We were up in the balcony. The place held 5,000 people. It was a mob scene. Watching Larry and Bruno get to the ring was unbelievable. That's how hot this thing was. All the matches in the Garden, Shea Stadium, then all the B clubs. It was absolutely crazy. But it was a testament to what they did. And, you know, the story Bruno always told me is that the old man wanted to go around with it one time. And he knew that was not an option. He knew that this thing could work. And look, Larry Zbyszko's is a great heel.
Are you there, sir?
Yes.
Huh?
Dominic, you wake up?
Everybody's here.
No, I don't wake up. I listen to you guys. I'm tired to hold the thing in my hands.
Well, I'll tell you what. Well, why don't we do this, Dominic? Let me say good night to you.
Okay. Call me when you know I have a 10 guy there, because that makes me tired. To listen. You know.
I'll tell you what, Dominic. I will give you a call tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. Okay.
All right.
All right, my friend. God bless.
Good night,
Good night, Dom.
So I want to tell one more Larry Zbyszko story here. Angelo, you're still there, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. So I used to drive up and down the road with Sting every now and then. And it was about 1989. Larry was, I believe, the Western States Heritage Champion. I was refereeing a lot of his matches, and I was trying to explain to Sting, a guy who came from the West Coast, didn't really understand what happened on the East Coast. He'd heard about the angle, but in his mind, it was not that big of a deal anymore. It had been 9 years ago, etc. And I said, Steve, you don't really know what you're talking about on this. I'm just telling you. When we get to that Civic Center in Philadelphia tonight, these people are going to drive him nuts. And, of course, the people are screaming. It's an NWA show. Bruno's nowhere to be seen. And these people are screaming, Bruno, Bruno, Bruno. And eventually Larry would go down the ringside and grab the mic and say, Bruno sucks. And the people would just go nuts. And I would tell Bruno the stories later on, and he just laughed his ass off. But I was trying to explain, here it is 9 years later, and Larry's in a different company. Bruno's name is not even really discussed, and they're out there screaming for him. I mean, do you understand that the idea that an angle carried forward 9 years? And I went to Sting after the match, and I said, Steve, you heard, right? Yeah. I mean, you couldn't miss it anyway. The whole thing was just crazy. But that was the power. You don't hear that today. An angle is 9 years over. The guys had 10 angles by then. It's finished. This angle was probably the hottest angle in the Northeast, if not the hottest angle, certainly of the modern times. Some things in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, no question about it, Sal. Absolutely.
It was absolutely mind-blowing. And I don't know that I ever told Larry that story, but that's a true story, and I won't forget it because Sting was just trying to convince me, Sal, I understand what it was, but it was a long time ago. It's over. I said, no, it's not really over. No. And, quite honestly, there were times there was talk about bringing Bruno and Larry back. When the NWA was not drawing in the Meadowlands, to my understanding, there was discussion about it. And Bruno was willing to do it. And it never happened. And I asked some questions. Believe me, I asked questions. And, of course, nobody wants to take responsibility. But my personal belief is that if they had done what Bruno wanted, put Larry on TV, give Bruno 4 weeks of television, these guys at the time were drawing maybe 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people into the Meadowlands. My personal belief is they sell the place out, hands down. And sometimes I don't know that somebody would have wanted that success. Right, because you're going in there with all your big guns. Here's a guy who's working your mid-card with a guy who's been retired for 8 or 9 years, and they're going to sell the place out. And something tells me that success would have not been very welcome.
No,
I hear you, brother.
You hit the nail on the head, Sal. They don't want that. They don't want you to remember. They want you to take today's bullshit that they shove down people's throats. They didn't want that.
Yeah, well, that's a, you know what, Nikki, that's a subject for another show, revisionist history.
Yes, but talking about one thing about the great Bruno, one thing you can never take away. Here's a guy that gets broken neck. April 26th of 1976. 2 months later, June 26th, he's wrestling and saves the company. If he didn't come back, that debacle with Ali and Inoki, it would have destroyed the company. Horrible. Sal, you had the book, and I believe that's true. If he didn't come back, he would have folded.
Me and Bruno discussed this story so many times I can't even tell you. The doctor hung up on the old man. Eventually, they got Bruno on the phone. There was a lot that went on there. Bruno got to the arena. He gave Hansen nothing. He couldn't, because any movement whatsoever to his neck could have put him in very serious jeopardy. Yeah, absolutely. The next day he got back on the plane. It was a long time before he saw Hansen again. He apologized. But to be honest with you, the way Bruno tells the story, and I'll confirm it with Stan next time I talk to him, which should be very soon. At the time, Stan had the biggest payoff he ever had in the business, so he really didn't care what Bruno did. At the time. And of course, he probably felt bad for the whole thing anyway, that they were in the position they were in. But it is true that he was going to go broke. The closed circuit, nothing. There was no business being done. Yeah. And look, Bruno, I think, saved the company a couple of times. I mean, it's just that simple. So look, at the end, it all turned out. A lot of good things happened for a lot of people. Bruno made people's careers. Helped Larry, JJ, Dominic. The truth be told, Bruno was a tremendous input to the talent for himself. And all kinds of things like that. And but he had to see something in you.
Yeah.
But, you know, he when he wanted to bring Bobby Duncan in, the old man said, Bruno, I never heard of this guy. So what's the difference, Vince? I have. I saw the guy once.
Sure.
We can make money with this guy. Let's bring him in. So
Yeah.
he would do it. But Bruno said one thing. He said, Sal, they listen to a couple of your suggestions. If they fail, they ain't listening to you no more. The only reason they kept listening to me because what I kept telling them was working.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
true.
Sal, I'll tell you what, brother. There's probably another book in you somewhere. But tonight, I have to say goodnight to you. Thank you, my friend, for joining us.
No worries.
We're Nikki and I are going to have you back on. We're going to bring you on for our a show that I do with Nikita called The Writer's Room. And our last guest went over swimmingly well. That was Scott Teal. And so we'll line up maybe Sal Corrente. How about it, Nikki? What do you think?
Absolutely. Have
You
to
think
do
we
it.
can
Sal
convince this
is
guy to come back on?
Yes.
Sure. Whenever you guys want, Larry. It's always good visiting with you. Hopefully, we'll cross paths in person soon.
Oh yeah.
No, it's fun Saturday. Yeah, anytime, Sal. Let me know.
All righty. You guys take it easy.
Thank you,
And
Sal. I'll give you a holler. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
thank you very much. You're welcome.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
brother. Take care. I'll tell you what, that guy has been so generous with his time.
Absolutely.
So it's just
Sal's a good guy, yeah.
just us girls here, Lar.
Well, you got a few minutes left. I think my battery's dying.
Oh.
Weird beat.
Can I
I'm
interject?
sorry, Larry. Well, I'll tell you what. I saved the best for last. I certainly didn't want to cut you off earlier in the conversation. How often do you get like the new living legend on your podcast? It like hardly ever happens.
Yeah, well, it was weird because, like I said, Bruno really didn't like it being used because he thought it was braggadocious and he was a humble guy. But, after I turned on him and I called myself, I'm a new living legend, I was like 27, it just made people hate me more. But then after 30 years of saying it and then the 10 years of broadcasting, I kind of grew into the part.
You certainly did, brother, and you earned every damn bit of it,
sir.
I still got it. But if it wasn't for Bruno, I might have never gotten the big break. So.
Well, I'll tell you what. Just for the record, I want to validate a story that Sal told. I was at the Civic Center that night when you said Bruno sucks. I was there. Front row, center ringside, brother. I bought the whole front row. And I had my my work with me. I treated everybody from work. And we all got the razz on Larry Zbyszko. So, Larry, celebrating his birthday, bittersweet for you?
Yeah, it is. To me, it's like Bruno is still here because he's just so much, in my life. And sometimes I'll go to my phone and scroll down to get a number, and I ask, Bruno's name and number, and I'm going, son of a bitch, I can still hear his voice. And
yeah. Well, brother, I'll tell you what, this podcast experienced something like that too. I actually had a co-host before Dan the Man. They called Jeff the Ref. Jeff passed away over a weekend. And I still do that. I scroll through my phone. I still see his number. But the magic of videotape and shows is that I can go back and watch him, and I can listen to his voice, and I can do that with Jeff the Ref. I can do that with Bruno, and I watched you. And I was able to watch you and Bruno today, and I remembered those times, and when. In fact, after I watched the famous chair shot heard around the world, I picked up Nikita's book, When It Was Real, and read about. And I thought I want to ask some questions tonight because I got that summer gun there. So go ahead, Nikki.
Larry, I got to tell you, it would have never worked had you not sold it. It takes two to tango. There's no way in hell Larry Zbyszko was going to go in there and out-muscle Bruno, out-wrestle Bruno. The way you played cat and mouse, wouldn't let him catch up with you, hit him on the balls and run. It was beautiful. And you get out there and bullshit talk on the promos, big mouth, braggadocious guy, and then you run all around the ring. It's like it was driving us crazy. We couldn't wait for him to get a hold of it.
You know what? That's one thing I learned from the old timers, from Bruno and Strongbow and Monsoon and all the guys. The one thing I learned is, even if people say, "Oh, wrestling," but they believed in Bruno. And the one thing I learned was to make them believe in me. And no matter what they thought, even during the 80s and 90s when they were chanting boring and laughing at the new guys, people believed that in real life I was an asshole. And they hated me. I could go out and stand in the ring for 5 minutes, do nothing, and the place would be chanting, "Larry sucks." And that was, yeah.
You know what? Honest to God, I wish, Larry, you just said something that popped me and it reminded me. I wish to God that Davey O'Hannon would have called in tonight. Man,
yeah, I haven't talked to Davey in years.
Yeah, he lives like 20 minutes from me. Because Davey said something, and I watched it. I want to talk to you about it because I popped. Davey will always say, and Dan the man will vouch for me on this. Davey always says the people believed because we believed. They believed that what we did was real because we believed what we did was real.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the key. The key. But there was an interview that Bruno is now. Imagine this. This is Bruno interviewing Davey O'Hannon, and first of all, you have to see the visuals. It's fucking hilarious. Pardon my French. It's hilarious, and I forget what Bruno says to Davey, but Davey turns around and says, "Well, excuse me, Mr. Sammartino," and you just could see Bruno trying not to bust character because he looked like he wanted to bust out laughing because Davey and Bruno were dear friends in life, and just the visual of Bruno almost losing it in this video was priceless because he never broke character ever. So that leads me to the question.
Well, never yet.
Has he ever broken character with you?
I mean, personally?
No, I mean, working.
Oh, no. That was sacred. You never break character.
Well, I'll tell you what, brother. We are going to have you back for your own episode.
Well, give me a call sometime and we'll figure something out.
Absolutely. We're poor here, but we buy people dinner. I told Dan the man our budget is a bag of chips and a bottle of Yoo-hoo.
Yeah.
Now we'll take it.
Well, hey, it's Bruno's birthday. God bless him. And again, I mean, and even when I think about it, it was so weird, Angelo. I mean, the first time I ever met Bruno was in that little church. And the last time I was by his side was at the funeral in that same little church.
Yeah.
It was just too strange, not to come from a higher dimension of something that was meant to be.
And
the last time I got to spend time with
Catholics here too, Larry. It's a bunch of Catholics, so we understand. We get it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the last time I actually got to spend time with him was at Bruno Sammartino Day in Swedesboro, New Jersey. They honored him with a citation, and I sat down and had lunch with him, and we had lunch and dinner that day. My mentor and friend Larry Sharp provided the wrestling for the day with his students.
Yeah, the Monster Factory.
Yeah, Larry was my trainer. Yeah,
I knew Larry good. He was a good guy. We had fun together.
Yeah, Larry, he was I'll tell you, talking about characters. Another one, last of the old time characters. Yeah. Brother, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime, guys. And Bruno, happy birthday.
Yeah,
I know he's listening.
Sure.
Larry, take care, my friend. I'll give you a holler tomorrow.
Okay, Ange.
Thank you. Good night,
Good
Larry.
night.
Larry Zbyszko, everybody.
Love you, look. Love you.
Well, gentlemen, that was epic.
Absolutely.
Stellar, ginormous. That was an extravaganza. That was excitement personified. Nikki, give me an adjective. You're a writer.
Wow.
There you go.
Wow.
I mean,
I still can't believe I'm a friggin' writer, okay? But it's like, wow. I mean,
I know.
Larry,
I know.
Zbyszko's birthday, that's it. Boom, you got it. And Dominic, DeNucci, JJ.
Talk to us, Dan.
You realize you had, I mean, and no, I'm not exaggerating.
I'm right back. Keep talking.
I'm not exaggerating. You had, I mean, Nikita, you had 400 years of wrestling experience on the phone right there between those guys.
Without a doubt.
And that's, I mean, some of the biggest names in the history of the business, and every one of them either got into wrestling or started loving wrestling or became a fan because of the same person. It's, you know, I hate not to sound like I'm going to get off topic, but it reminds me of, oh, look, there's the book. It reminds me
I had to go
of
get Nikki's book.
Oh, thank you, Ange.
A panel I was at years ago, and it was a bunch of mildly like successful stand-up comedians, and every one of them got their start because of Rodney Dangerfield, and it was crazy to hear that story. And it's the same thing with these guys. I mean, JJ Dillon, like I'm 37. To me, he's been around forever, and he's talking when I was a teenager and I went and saw Bruno. And Larry Zbyszko literally breaking into his house to sneak through some bushes just to get a word with him.
Breaking. How did you meet your hero? Breaking and entering.
Well, I mean, he talked. You know, the first two experiences he had with him, he stalked him at a church, and then he broke into his house. Like
exactly.
That is fan dedication, and to think, you know, Larry Zbyszko, I'm like I said, I'm not even 40. He's been the living legend.
That story's probably in Nikki's book somewhere.
Oh, he's been the living legend since I was a kid, and he talks about being a teenager training with Bruno in his basement. Like,
yes,
you know, I remember watching the tapes, and I mean, Bruno, you mentioned his last match was in '81. I wasn't even alive. I was watching Bruno on TV. He was in his 50s running circles around guys, you know, guys 30 years, 25, 30 years younger than he was.
Exactly.
You don't, I mean, look at some of the pictures behind you, Angelo, how Bruno's in his 40s in most of those photos.
Yeah.
But
I'll step out the way.
Everybody was a fan before they became a pro because they loved it. They loved it. You have to love it. It's got to be in your heart or you can't do it.
Yeah, you don't see wrestlers that look like this anymore.
No,
you really don't.
And you know, it's funny what Larry Zbyszko mentioned. How he trained under Bruno's regiment, and he's right. They have almost identical physiques, and you would never have thought that's why, because he trained the Bruno regiment.
Bruno trained Larry the way Bruno trained.
Exactly.
They looked like they could have been related.
Brother, without a doubt. Yes.
Yeah.
Or father and son. Because even Vince mentions it a lot on the broadcast, especially in 1977. He said Larry Zbyszko emulates Bruno. He even resembles him physically. His characteristics, his mannerisms, and it's true. It's very true. How would Larry win matches? Bear hug. You know, he would do the suplex too, but the bear hug a lot. One of Bruno's trademarks, of course.
The book is When It Was Real. The author is my friend, my cohort in crime, my sometimes co-host when Dan is working, Nikita Breznikov. Nikki, this is the book. Buy it. I got mine. Get yours. You ain't getting mine.
I poured my heart out. That's all I can say. I put everything in there.
I got to tell you something.
It's about us. Us as
and
fans.
I have to tell you something. I popped on like page 2. Okay, I'm going to tell you why. You've got something in here. Unless you're from New Jersey, you don't know this place. I lived my childhood in this building, the Cherry Hill Arena.
Ah, there you go.
Okay, now let me tell everybody what the Cherry Hill Arena was. It was the home of the New Jersey Devils hockey team. when they were still a farm club before they became an actual NHL team.
Wow.
It was called the Cherry Hill Arena. And that was the first time I ever got to, like, slap a wrestler. The guy coming through the aisle was Chief Jay Strongbow.
Ooh.
He wrestled. Who the hell did he wrestle that night? Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Who the hell did Chief wrestle? Shit. No, that wasn't it. I'm trying to remember who Chief wrestled. But I remember he won. He beat whoever he was wrestling. He came down the aisle. And you know how people, they do like one of these jobs? When you, I got a big, sweaty Italian Indian Paul.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because the Chief was a wooden nickel Indian, you know? He was
His mother was legit Cherokee, though.
Isn't that something?
Yes. Oh,
But
yes.
his Scarpa, right, was Italian.
Yep. Because he was Joe Scarpa down south, before he came. But Monsoon brought him up and just said, look, the old man wants to, do this Indian character. So Chief was like, yeah, boom. And that was it. He was into it, man.
Well, he was working for Eddie Graham down there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He had a great career before WWF. And then it was just like it was said, most guys' careers are winding down at that time. His took off.
Know. Oh my God, his took off. Are you kidding me? Holy crap! Dan, you got a lesson in history, a wrestling history lesson.
Oh yes, sir.
And a lesson on Bruno. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I have been a Bruno fan since I was like 6, and that never went away. I never liked John Wayne or Cowboys and Indians. Not that I didn't watch Cowboys and Indians or John Wayne, but I'd much rather watch wrestling and Bruno beat people up. So that was my childhood, and I got to live my dream. And I got to meet my heroes. And a lot of people, and I feel bad for kids today, because, Nikki, they don't have any heroes to look up to.
Nobody they can believe in, no.
And and to some degree, Dan,
yes, sir.
we were able to look up to our heroes, and in some cases meet our heroes.
Yeah, they were.
Look at Dan. Look behind Dan. He's got a wall full of his heroes there. And there's Bruno right there.
Yep.
First one next to Ronnie Garvin. First of all, you need to rearrange those pictures, young man, because Ivan Koloff should clearly go next to Bruno.
I should swap Bruno and Ronnie?
You got it. Bruno stays on the end because that's the leadership position.
Yeah, that's why I put him on the
Ronnie
first.
Garvin over, put Ivan Koloff side by side with Bruno. Put Ronnie Garvin over where Greg Valentine is.
Okay.
On the opposite end. Okay?
Gotcha.
That's good.
I know.
You do that, I'm happy.
You're not as big a fan of the Garvin brothers as I was growing up.
There you go.
Or the Garvin boys, I should say, not the brothers. Excuse me.
Yeah, right.
I don't think we had as much of a taste of them, like, of course, the Northeast had up until Hulkamania. I mean, the Northeast ruled, and of course, Bruno ruled, so that was it. So then, Backlund, can Backlund carry for Bruno? No, but he's a separate entity. He's his kind of a person. People say, well, then they brought Bruno in, but well, actually, it was Bruno and Larry carrying on their feud, which was taking off, because then for a lot of the matches when Bruno was wrestling Zbyszko in the Garden, when that first hit, then they would throw the Samoans to Backlund, which not just little the Samoans, they were a tremendous team, but as singles, it wasn't like going to be selling out the arena. So you could put Backlund with one of the Samoans, which he did back to back when Larry and Bruno were carrying. So really, they were the main event that night. No question.
Nikita, you mentioned something a minute ago. Dan and I actually had this conversation. In fact, Dan asked a previous guest. I think, Dan, it might have been Doc Diamond that we had on.
Oh, Doc.
He asked Doc Diamond, I think the gist of his question was, what is it about the Northeast that generates so many great wrestlers? Why do they all come from here? Was that the gist of it, Dan?
Yeah. He was talking about the triangle. He talked about New Jersey, Philly, New York, like that area. And it was literally just name. And again, I was a little biased, living in Maryland at the time, but half the Hall of Fame is from some combination of New York, New Jersey. And I was asking him, what is it about that area that just churned out not just so much talent, but so many wrestlers in general?
Fans, without a doubt. It's the passion of the fans. And Nikolai, when he came to this country, settled in Paulsboro, New Jersey. So There you go, another part of that nucleus. But yes, it's the fans, because without the fans, you're not going to have shit. Everybody's going to fold their tents and they're going to go away.
Yeah.
The fans have so much passion, not to knock the people in the South or Canada or anywhere else, but that tri-state area in Maryland, I was a Baltimore boy, Dan, so it's like, people like Mrs. Krieger, Angelo, you remember her, of course, and she she was from Baltimore, but she would take the train up to New York. Because my wife asked me one time, she said, how come we never see her on the TV tape? Because I said she couldn't get there. There was no train to Philadelphia. And then what the hell is she going to do to get to Market Street? But New York, she could take the train.
Straight up.
Yeah, go right out to the Garden. So it's right there. So she did not miss that.
Yeah.
And the passion of the fans is what drives. And again, like I said, everybody was a fan before they became I shouldn't say everybody, but I'm going to say 99% were wrestling fans before they became pros. And that just carries on, and that emotion's just going to pour out of you. And you've got a winning combination.
Now, Dan, did you hear what Nikki just said? Now, remember something that superstar Bill Dundee told us, and you were surprised for him to validate this. And Nikki, I was telling our young squire here about a woman, an old lady, that was front and center at every Memphis Mid-South wrestling show. Like clockwork, she was there every Monday night. Now, we had superstar Bill Dundee on the show, and he remembered, and Dan got a lesson in these old school characters that used to be fans, part of the fan, the Mark Brigade.
Right.
What I guess, is that still a thing now, Marks? Or are we
you're right.
Now?
I think about it as like as a Redskins fan. We had the Hogs. They weren't affiliated with the team, but they were as big a character on the sidelines as watching Riggins and those guys play.
And that's where Nikki's going. Is some of these fans became celebrities. It was crazy.
Absolutely. Now, see,
give you another example, Nikki. I'll give you a perfect example. The Hat Guy from ECW.
Yeah, I've wrestled against Hat Guy. Oh, I love him.
I love John. He's a great guy. John's a character.
Yes, he is. He and his partner Waikushi wrestled Nikolai and I several times for Dino Sana. But with Mrs. Krieger, a lot of so-called know-it-alls say, "Oh, she was paid to be in the audience." It's like, are you a simple son of a bitch? You lucky the promoters pay the friggin' boys. They ain't gonna pay some old lady to sit at ringside. That's great. It's spontaneous, but they sure as hell ain't gonna give her a dime to do that. It's like that's a sideshow. They don't give a shit about that. It happened naturally. She was not paid.
Yeah. Good, Dan.
No, I mean it's crazy to think like you don't kind of get those characters, not in the fandom anymore. And you talk about earlier you had mentioned looking up to wrestlers and being fans. I think the current product, John Cena kind of became a model citizen of sorts with his involvement with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. He's got the record by hundreds of visits. And even that's like, oh, Make-A-Wish, he's a good guy, he's doing charity. It's still not the same. It's still not that broad spectrum reverence. I mean,
but wait a minute.
Wait
a minute. Rocky Johnson was involved in that back in 1983, but he didn't get the big fanfare. He was
well. That's what I was going to get to. Is if you look at the list, the top 10 from Make-A-Wish, half of them are wrestlers. Most of the people over 200 are wrestlers. But you also, I mean, you think back, like, you grab somebody off the street, even if they're not a wrestling fan. Oh, wrestling. That's that thing that Bruno Sammartino guy does. You ask a random person on the street who John Cena is, they couldn't pick him out of a lineup with a gun to their head half the time. Not to say he's not a star, but he doesn't have that across the world appeal. There was a point with ticket sales, with numbers.
Here's the problem.
Go ahead.
Here's the biggest, and I'm gonna validate what you're saying, but I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you the reason they couldn't pick John Cena out. He's unrecognizable, out of his element. You put him in a ring, and he's recognizable. Okay?
Very good.
He's recognizable. You take John Cena out of his element, and send him down a street corner, Main Street, USA, any city, right? You would be hard-pressed to find 20 people who could say, oh, that's John Cena, the WWE wrestler.
Very good.
But back in the day, send Bruno Sammartino down the street, everyone could pick him out. Everyone. They knew he was a wrestler because he looked like a wrestler.
And that's validated because he couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed. He couldn't go to the grocery store.
Exactly. But the other thing, Nikki, is look at him. He looked like, you said it yourself, he looked like a gorilla.
Yes. A very dear friend of mine, Scott Wilson, said he was watching Bruno sign autographs outside of Long Island's Nassau County Coliseum. He said he's in a suit. He said that jacket, he said the buttons were bursting. His sweat's pouring off because it's July, but he's signing the autographs. But he's like, he was so huge. It's like, yeah. Without a doubt. He
had shoulders that were like, his shoulders were massive.
And the reason I speak with tears, he gave his body. His hands were all gnarled up at the end. His ears, his nose. I mean, it's like this guy gave everything he had to the business.
Yeah. And Sal pointed out something critically important. They had boxing matches. They were taking flat back bumps on boxing matches, canvases.
Yeah.
Okay. Those boxing rings, they didn't have any center spring. They were flat.
Yeah, they weren't designed to fall on.
Ask Davey.
That's exactly right.
They cursed the Baltimore Civic Center. They said that was a slab of cement. That was horrible. Please don't.
Well, I got news for you.
No, thank you.
The two rings, and Dan and I have heard this before on the show. The two rings, Baltimore and the Sportatorium in Dallas, Texas, because that ring was concreted in place.
Yeah.
Am I lying, Dan?
No, not in the slightest. No, and that's
concreted in place.
Yeah, it's like
thing had no give.
It's like getting tackled on grass versus getting tackled on AstroTurf. You know the difference.
Exactly.
And people don't want to do it.
And a fall out of the ring in Baltimore, it was a little bit higher than normal. So it's like, son of a bitch, I got to take a bump out of the ring. I'm going way up, and then I got to worry about the landing when I get down at the bottom.
Yeah.
Those poor guys.
Yeah. And I heard superstar Billy Graham tell a story about the night that he beat Bruno for the title. He almost didn't get out of that building. People don't realize that's a shoot. He almost didn't get out of that building alive. He had to use the belt as like a helicopter blade, like a whirly bird. Am I lying, Nikki?
No. Because for months, up until Backlund won, we hated to have it told that he beat Bruno. He cheated in Baltimore, and we had to have that black eye. That's where the hell Bruno lost his belt to that son of a bitch. We hated that.
Exactly.
I'll tell you what, Ange, and it's in the book. You'll probably read it. He almost didn't win the belt that night. There was almost a horrible accident. He came out of the ring, and there was an empty chair, and his foot went through it. Luckily, he landed right. You can see that in the video. That could have been a disaster right there.
Oh, man.
His leg easily.
Yeah. Straight up. Dan, what's going on with Wrestling with the Future? Where are we?
Well, we've got, obviously, this was a big build-up show. We've got a couple of bigger names coming up. I know you were talking with, hang on, let me get the schedule here.
Yes, sir.
We've got our second part interview with Eddie Mansfield on Thursday. And we've still got, hang on, let me get the rest of these names. Yeah, we've got the two-part with Eddie Mansfield. You mentioned Brian Pillman Jr. is coming back. We've got another visit from our favorite music lover and music manager. And
Stephen Plim
old Mr. Plim.
Mr. Plim will be here, absolutely. We've got the return of Ron Fuller, the Tennessee stud, is coming back. We may have a very special, and I'll tell you now, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's okay. But we are in communication with John McAfee.
Nice.
You know who John McAfee is?
No.
He invented McAfee antivirus. It's probably on your computer right now.
I have that. Wow.
Yeah, he's transitioned into a libertarian politician as well.
Wow.
We are communicating. So far, he hasn't told me to go F myself, but he likes to do that. But we are reaching out. I'm trying to get John McAfee here. I'll just say that. So if it doesn't happen, at least we tried. Anyway, who else? Oh, yes, you said Eddie Mansfield's coming back. We've got, who else do we got? I got to look at my book because there's a couple of people here. We got some people coming. Stephen Flynn. Oh, here we go. Yes. Mr. Electricity, Steven Regal, will be joining us, and Steve Kern will be here. Looks like the end of October, early November for Steve Kern. November, I don't know what's happening at November. It all depends on what happens on November 3rd, and then I'll tell you November 4th.
But wait a minute, Ange, whatever happened to Ann Casey? I want to be with that show. When are we going to have Ann Casey?
I have had communications with Ann Casey, and she tells me yes, and she tells me yes. And every time she says yes, her spokesperson, and I'll give you his name in case you know the guy. I'll give it to you off the air. Her spokesperson, or who says he's her spokesperson, keeps canceling her out. There's a problem there with I don't want to say anymore on the air. I'll tell you off,
that.
Because there's a couple of people who say they're running this group or what. Anyway,
yeah,
I don't even want to get into
see that happen. She'd be a great guest.
I'm having the women back. I'm having Joyce Grable's coming back.
Oh, Joyce, very good. Yeah,
I'm having Casey Carlisle's coming back. Princess Victoria, Leilani Kai.
Velvet and Vicky. You'd have them both on together. That'd be great.
I would love to. You got Leilani Kai, Judy Martin's coming back. You know, they've all been here. They've all been here before. Multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And Casey's the only one for some reason. I don't know why, but this person keeps canceling her out.
I'll find
And I don't know if they have the authority to, but I'm assuming they do. That's why I haven't said anything.
Let's see. Okay.
So Nikki, why don't you tell everybody what's going on with you? Where can they reach you, communicate with you, buy your book?
Facebook. I'm always there. We're just waiting for the cloud to lift with the COVID, and then we can get back to wrestling and acting and everything else. But for the book, crowbarpress.com, Scott Teal's beautiful company. And there is a Kindle version on Amazon when it was real. And please, the only thing I'm going to say is nobody's getting rich. That wasn't the idea. But it tells the story of what it was about when it was real, how we as fans loved it and still do.
Absolutely. And I will tell everyone that we are here for the long haul. We have some amazing guests coming up. Where else are you going to see a show preserve the rich history of wrestling other than Wrestling with the Future? On one show, think about tonight's show. On one show, the man who wrote the definitive book on Bruno, the autobiography of wrestling's living legend, Sal Corrente. That's one. That was worth a show by himself. Then you've got J.J. Dillon, Dominic DeNucci, Larry Zbyszko, Nikita Breznikov, Dan the freaking man. Okay, where
Well, I mean, that's the heart and soul of the show right there.
I'm telling you, brother. And then you get to look at my face for 2 hours. All right?
You the man, Owens. You the man.
I try, brother. I try. For Wrestling with the Future, for Dan the Man, for Nikita Breznikov, I'm Angelo DeCipio. Happy wrestling, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.